Hey guys, so welcome to iGaming. In this video we will go through the history of Pokemon games, from the first Pokemon games on 1996, which were Pokemon Red and Blue, but also Pokemon Green, which was only released in Japan, to the latest Pokemon Scarlet and Pokemon Violet, coming out on 2022. I'm going to tell you the generation, the number of Pokemon on the Pokédex and also the starters on each game, and I'm also going to show you the legendary Pokemon for each game. We're only going to talk about the main game series, not about the spin-offs, because there are more than 20 spin-offs Pokemon games as well, and we're not going to talk about that on this video. Maybe in the future I'll make a video with all the Pokemon spin-off games. So without further ado, let's get started with all the Pokemon games that are available on the Nintendo company. The first set of games we're going to talk about are the first games ever released, and they are part of the first generation of Pokemon games. The games are Pokemon Red version and Pokemon Blue version. They are published by Nintendo for the original Game Boy, and they are the first installments of the Pokemon video game series. They were first released in Japan in 1996 as Pocket Monster Red and Pocket Monsters Green, with the special edition Pocket Monsters Blue, being released in Japan later the same year. The games were later released as Pokemon Red and Pokemon Blue in North America and Australia in 1998 and Europe in 1999. Pokemon Red and Pokemon Blue combined Red, Green, Blue for release outside of Japan. The player controls the protagonist from an overhead perspective and navigates him through the fictional region of Kanto in a quest to master Pokemon battling. The goal of the games is to become the champion of the Indigo League by defeating the 8 gym leaders and then the top 4 Pokemon trainers in the land, the Elite Four. Another objective is to complete the Pokédex, an in-game encyclopedia, by obtaining the 151 available Pokemon. These games were the first generation of the Pokemon games. They had 151 Pokemon on the Pokédex to be caught. The starters of this game were Bulbasaur, which is a grass and poison Pokemon, Charmander, which is a fire Pokemon, and Squirtle, which is a water Pokemon. And there were 4 legendary Pokemon as well. And the legendary were Articuno, which is an ice and flying Pokemon, Zapdos, which is electric and flying, Moltres, a fire and flying Pokemon, and Mewtwo, which is a psychic Pokemon. The games take place in the Kanto region, and Pokemon Red, Green and Blue sold a total of 31.05 million copies worldwide. The second game in this list is Pokemon Yellow. Pokemon Yellow version Special Pikachu Edition, and it is more commonly known as Pokemon Yellow version or just Pokemon Yellow, and it's a 1998 role-playing video game for the Game Boy and for the Game Boy Color. It is an enhanced version of Pokemon Red and Blue, and it's part of the first generation of Pokemon games. It was firstly released on Japan on September 12 on 1998, and then in Australia and North America in 1999, and then in Europe in 2000. Along with the release of Pokemon Yellow, a special edition of Pokemon-themed Game Boy Color was also released. Pokemon Yellow is loosely based on the anime. There are not many differences between Pokemon Yellow and Pokemon previous versions. The graphics were better and they added colors to the game for the Game Boy Color. The only major difference is that you don't get to choose your starter and you get Pikachu instead, and Pikachu will be following you behind the whole game. It has the same legendary Pokemon and it is also taking place in the Kanto region. Pokemon Yellow sold a total of 14.5 million copies. These were all the games in the first generation. The next games coming in this list are part of the second generation of Pokemon games, so let's get started. Pokemon Gold version and Pokemon Silver version are released for the Game Boy Color. They are the first installments in the second generation of the Pokemon games. They were released in Japan in 1999, in Australia and North America in 2000, and in Europe in 2001. The game introduces 100 new species of Pokemon and follows the progress of the player character in their quest to master Pokemon battling. So in this game there were a total of 251 Pokemon to be caught. The starter on these games were Chikorita, which is a grass Pokemon, Cyndaquil, which is a fire Pokemon, and Totodile, which is a water Pokemon. There are many legendaries in this game, such as Raikoku, which is an electric Pokemon, Entei, a fire-type Pokemon, and Suicune, which is a water-type Pokemon. In this game there were two regions, Johto and Kanto, and you can get 16 badges in total. Pokemon Gold and Silver sold a total of 23.73 million copies. The next game that came out was Pokemon Crystal. It is an improved version of Pokemon Gold and Pokemon Silver, and it's the final game of the second generation of Pokemon video game series. It is also the final Pokemon game to be released for the Game Boy Color system. It was released in Japan on December 14, 2000, and it was released internationally in 2001. The gameplay of Pokemon Crystal is largely the same as in Gold and Silver, although it has several new features. It is the first Pokemon game to allow players to choose the sex of their character, while previously the character was always male. For the first time, Pokemon have brief animated sprites once they enter on battles. For example, when a Cyndaquil enters a battle, the flames on his back flicker. This feature was absent in Pokemon Ruby. Pokemon Crystal had the same starters and the same legendary Pokemon as the previous Pokemon Gold and Silver. There was an extra addition to the legendaries in this game, and it was Celebi and could only be caught in a special event. Pokemon Crystal sold a total of 6.39 million copies. Alright, so now we will go to the next generation, the third generation of Pokemon games, and it was also in a new console, which was Game Boy Advance, in a new handheld console. So Pokemon Ruby version and Pokemon Sapphire version are the 2002 Pokemon games developed for the Game Boy Advance. They are the first installments in the third generation of Pokemon games, and they're also known as the Advanced generation. The gameplay is mostly unchanged from the previous games. The player controls the main characters from an overhead perspective, and the controls are largely the same as those of previous games. As with previous games, the main objectives are to catch all the Pokemon in the game and defeat the Elite Four, also like their predecessors. The game's main subplot involves the player's character defeating a criminal organization that attempts to take over the region. New features such as double battles, Pokemon abilities, and 135 new Pokemon were added. Owing to the increased capabilities of the Game Boy Advance, 4 players may be connected to each other at a time instead of previously limit of 2. Additionally, the games can be connected to an e-reader on the third generation Pokemon games. So as previously stated many times, these games are the third generation of Pokemon games, and they had 386 Pokemon on the Pokédex to be caught. The starters on Ruby and Sapphires were Trico, which is a grass Pokemon, then we have Torchic, which is a fire Pokemon, and also Mudkip, which is a water Pokemon. There were at least total 6 legendaries. 4 of them were the same in both games, but Ruby and Sapphire also had an exclusive legendary in their games. So Regirock was a rock-type Pokemon, then Regice, an ice Pokemon, and then we had Registeel, a steel Pokemon. Alright, we also had Rayquaza, which was a dragon and flying Pokemon. Ruby and Sapphire had 2 exclusive Pokemon. On Pokemon Ruby, you could catch the first one, which was Latios, which is a dragon and psychic, and the second one was Groudon, which is a ground-type Pokemon. While in Sapphire, you could catch Latias, and that is also a dragon and psychic Pokemon, and Kyogre, which is a water-type Pokemon. Ruby and Sapphire took place in the Hoenn region. Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire sold a total of The next games in the list are a remake. They are the Pokemon Fire Red and Pokemon Leaf Green. And Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green are the 2004 remakes of the 1996 Pokemon Red and Blue. They were developed for the Game Boy Advance. Fire Red and Leaf Green were first released in Japan in 2004 and then in North America and Europe in September and October again 2004. The games are part of the third generation and hold the distinction of being the first enhanced remakes of previous games within the franchise. As the first remake in Pokemon franchise, the game revisited the original pair of Pokemon games, Pokemon Red and Green versions. The remakes features the characters, plot elements and challenges from the originals alongside with several updates introduced in Generation 3. This game, since it was part of the third generation, it had 386 Pokemon in the Pokédex. The legendaries were a mix on Pokemon Fire Red. We had Articuno, Zapdos, Moltres, Mewtwo, Raikou, Entei or Suicune. Raikou was available if you choose Squirtle, Entei if you chose Bulbasaur, and Suicune if you choose Charmander. And in Pokemon Leaf Green, we had Articuno, Zapdos, Moltres, and Mewtwo. Raikoku, Entei, or Suicune was, if you, for example, chose Raikoku, you had to choose Squirtle, and if you chose Entei, you had to get Bulbasaur, and if you wanted Suicune in your game, you had to choose Charmander as your starter. Pokemon Leaf Green and Fire Red sold a total of 12 million copies. The next game coming out is also a third generation game and it's called Pokemon Emerald. Pokemon Emerald is a solitary version to Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire, and it is the fifth and final generation 3-core series game. Like its predecessors Pokemon Crystal, it added many features not present in the earlier paired versions. It was released in Japan on September 16, 2004 and in North America on May 1, 2005, in Australia on June 9, 2005 and in Europe on October 21, 2005. Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire and Emerald are all games based in the Hoenn region, but they have differences. In fact, Emerald stands out more from the two criminal teams and their objectives. In Ruby, the major theme is Magma, with Team Aqua helping the player to bring it down. Their main objective is to wake up Groudon and expand the land over oceans. In Sapphire, the major team is Team Aqua, with Team Magma helping the player to bring it down. The main objective is to wake Kyarge and expand the oceans. In Emerald, both teams are equally important. Both clash with each other with their conflicting motives. Both legendary Pokemon are awoken and the player has to wake Rayquaza up to stop the chaotic fight between the two Pokemon. The Cave of Origin. In Ruby and Sapphire, the Cave of Origin is important, as after Kyogre, Groudon are awoken, the chaos occurs in this cave and the player has to fight or catch them to save the world. In Emerald, since both are awoken, the two have a showdown in the Sutpolis waters. The player goes to the cave just to meet Wallace, who asks the player to go, find and get Rayquaza to stop the fight. Thus, there is no need for a battle directly with the legendary. Pokemon Emerald sold a total of 7.06 million copies. Next, we go to the 4th generation. All the games released for the 4th generation were for the iconic Nintendo DS. The next game are Pokemon Diamond and Pokemon Pearl, and they are the 2006 Nintendo DS games. They are the first installments of the 4th generation of the Pokemon video game series. They were first released in Japan in 28 September 2006 and released in North America, Australia and Europe in 2007. Afterwards, we had Pokemon Platinum, which was an updated version, and it was released 2 years later in each region. Like previous Pokemon games, Diamond and Pearl chronicle the adventures of a young Pokemon trainer as they train and battle Pokemon, while also thwarting the schemes of a criminal organization called Team Galactic. The games added many new features, such as internet play over the Nintendo Wi-Fi connections, changes to battle mechanisms and Pokemon contests, along with the addition of 107 new Pokemon. The games are independent of each other but feature largely the same plot, and while both can be played separately, it is necessary to trace between them in order to complete the game's Pokédex. So as I said earlier, the games had a total of 493 Pokemon to catch. The starters for these Pokemon games were Turtwig, which was a grass Pokemon, Chimchar, a fire Pokemon, and Piplup, a water Pokemon. There are many legendaries in Pokemon Diamond and Pearl. Let's start with the legendaries which are exclusive. We have Dialga, which was on Pokemon Diamond, and it's a Steel and Dragon Pokemon. And we also have Palkia on Pokemon Pearl, which is a Water and Dragon Pokemon. Now let me show you the Pokemon that are legendaries and could be caught on both games. We have Heatran, a Fire Steel Pokemon, Regigigas, a normal type Pokemon, Giratina, which is a Ghost Dragon Pokemon, and Cresselia, which is a Psychic Pokemon. We also had Mesprit, Uxie, and Azelf, which are purely Psychic Pokemon. Regigigas requires you to have Regirock, Regice, and Registeel in your team to be caught. The series take place in the region of Sinnoh, and there are 8 badges in total to be collected. Pokemon Diamond and Pearl sold a total of 17.67 million copies. The next game coming out was Pokemon Platinum. Pokemon Platinum is a title on the Pokemon series, and it was an enhanced version of Pokemon Diamond and Pearl, and it has the same vein as Pokemon Yellow Crystal and Emerald. It was released in Japan on September 13, 2008, and later on in North America, Australia and Europe in 2009. The developers made Platinum with the intent of making it a stronger version of Diamond and Pearl, which they describe as the ultimate Pokemon titles. In Platinum, player control either a male or a female character and starts with one of the 3 Pokemon given to them from Professor Rowan. The mascot Pokemon is Giratina, who plays a central role in the game's plot. While it only had one form in Diamond and Pearl, it is given a new alternate forms called Origin Forme, alongside a new area called the Distortion World, which features altered psychic from the normal land of Sinnoh, where the game takes place. The gameplay stays true to the traditional Pokemon game mechanics. Players explore a large area which ranges from mountains to bodies of water, grasslands, populated areas, and snowy expanses. Similar to previous titles, players have their Pokemon fights turn-based, and the battles against each other are, as I said, on the turn-based level. Pokemon Platinum had many legendaries, from Articuno to Zapdos, Moltres, Dialga, Palkia, Heatran, Regigigas, Giratina, Cresselia, Mesprit, Uxie, Azelf, and as I said earlier, you could catch Regigigas only if you had Regirock, Regice, and Registeel in your team. Pokemon Platinum sold a total of 7.7 million copies. The next games are the last for the 4th generation, and they are also a remake. The new games are Pokemon Heart Gold and Pokemon Soul Silver. Much like how Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green revisited the Generation 1 story of Kanto, Heart Gold and Soul Silver retells the story of Johto, with the player's starting town being New Bark Town. While the games feature several expansions in key areas, the overall plot follows the same direction as the original Gold and Silver. Some aspects exclusive to crystals are also included, like how Fire Red and Leaf Green could link up with Ruby and Sapphire and Emerald to complete the Pokédex by trading regional exclusive Pokémon. Heart Gold and Soul Silver can link up with Diamond and Pearl and Platinum to obtain Pokémon unavailable in Johto and Kanto, such as the Sinnoh starters and vice versa. Heart Gold is a remake of Gold and is essentially the same world plot, etc., but it is retold in the more modern DS-era game engine. It has modernized depiction of the Johto and Kanto from the original Gold and Silver. There is some quality life improvements in general, and there is a few locations that weren't in the originals, as well as more legendary Pokémon from other regions look prettier as well. Pokémon Heart Gold and Soul Silver sold a total of 12.72 million copies. The next set of games are from the 5th generation of Pokémon games, and all these 5th generation games were also released on the Nintendo DS. The 5th generation started with Pokémon Black and White. Pokémon Black version and Pokémon White version are the 2010 games for the Nintendo DS, and they are the first installment of the 5th generation of the Pokémon games series. First released in Japan on 18th September 2010, they were also later released in Europe and North America and Australia in 2011. Sequels to Black and White, Pokémon Black 2 and Pokémon White 2 were released on the Nintendo DS on 2012. Similar to previous installments of the series, the two games follow the journey of a young Pokémon trainer through the region of Unova. As they train, Pokémon used to compete against other trainers while thwarting the schemes of the criminal organization Team Plasma. Black and White introduced 156 new Pokémon to the franchise, 5 more than the previous record holder Pokémon Red and Pokémon Blue, as well as many new features, including a seasonal cycle, rotation battles, fully animated Pokémon sprites, and triple battles. Both titles are independent of each other, but they feature largely the same plot, and while both can be played separately, trading Pokémon between both of the games is necessary in order to complete the game's Pokédex, so in total there are 649 available Pokémon on Black and White to be caught. The starters are Snivy, which is a grass Pokémon, Tapig, a fire Pokémon, and Oshvot, a water Pokémon. The legendaries in this game, as in many previous versions, have some exclusives. Let me show you all the legendaries and then the exclusive ones. The legendary Pokémon are Cobalion, which is a steel and fighting Pokémon, Terrakiona, a rock and fighting Pokémon, Virizion, which is a grass and fighting, Landorus, which is a ground and flying Pokémon, Kyurem, which is a dragon and an ice Pokémon. Now let me show you the exclusive Pokémon, which are the legendary ones in Pokémon Black and Pokémon White. In Black, we have Tornadus, which is a flying Pokémon, Reshiram, which is a dragon and fire Pokémon. In Pokémon White, we have Thundurus, which is an electric and flying Pokémon, and Zekrom, which is a dragon and electric Pokémon. Pokémon Black and White take part on the region of Unova, and they have 8 badges to be collected. Pokémon Black and White sold a total of 15.64 million copies. The next games of the series are Pokémon Black 2 and Pokémon White 2, and they are the 2012 Nintendo DS games. These are part of the 5th generation of Pokémon games. The games are direct sequels to Pokémon Black and Pokémon White, being the first sequels in the series. They were first released in Japan in June 2012, with a worldwide release following it on October 2012 as the last first-party games for the Nintendo DS system. Black 2 and White 2 follow a Pokémon trainer's journey to become the Pokémon champion of Unova 2 years after the events of Black and White. Following the events of its predecessors, the criminal organization Team Plasma have come back as Neo Team Plasma, and the player must thwart their plans throughout the story, stopping them from ruining the world. The game also includes new features such as key system, hidden growths, new cities, and newly available Pokemon. Like other core series Pokemon games, players must trade between versions in order to complete the Pokédex. The game has the same starters as Pokemon Black and Pokemon White. There are many legendaries appearing in these games such as Regirock, Regi-Ice, Registeel, Latios, Uxie, Mesprit, Azef, Heatran, Regigigas, Cresselia, Cobalion, Terrakion, Virizion, Tornadus, Thundurus, Zekrom, Landorus, Kyurem, Tondarus, Thunderaus, and Landorus. So many legendaries on these games. Pokemon Black 2 and White 2 sold a total of 8.52 million copies worldwide. And we're shifting to a new generation and a new console. The 6th generation is coming and all the games are on the Nintendo 3DS. The first game on the 6th generation are Pokemon X and Pokemon Y. Pokemon X and Pokemon Y are the 2013 games for the Nintendo 3DS and they are the first installment in the 6th generation of the main video game series. Pokemon X and Y were released worldwide in October 2013, making them the first Nintendo-published retail games to have simultaneously global releases in all the key regions. As with previous installments, both games follow the journey of a young Pokemon trainer and friends as they train Pokemon. This time the games take place in a Kalos region based on France, with the objective being to thwart the schemes of the nefarious criminal organization Team Flare, all while attempting to challenge the Pokemon League. Champion X and Y introduced 72 new Pokemon species and includes new features such as the new fairy type, character customization, updated battle and training mechanics, and completely rendered polygonal 3D graphics as opposed to the sprites used in the previous generations. A new form of Pokemon evolution known as Mega Evolution allows players to further evolve many species fully evolved Pokemon, with 13 of these evolutions available to these games. Both titles are independent of each other but feature largely the same plot, and while each can be played separately, trading Pokemon between the two games is, as in the past titles, necessary in order for a player to obtain every Pokemon species. Pokemon X and Y had a total of 721 Pokemon to be caught and added in the Pokédex. Pokemon X and Y starters were Chespin, a grass Pokemon, Fennekin, a fire Pokemon, and Froakie, a water Pokemon. The legendaries on Pokemon X and Y, which you can get on both games, are Articuno, Zapdos or Moltres, Mewtwo, Zicardi, which is a dragon and ground Pokemon. The exclusive Pokemon legendary on Pokemon X was Xerneas, which was a fairy Pokemon. The exclusive legendary Pokemon in Y was Yveltal, which is a dark and flying Pokemon. Pokemon X and Y took place in the Kalos region and there are 8 badges in total. Pokemon X and Y sold a total of 16.58 million copies. The next game in the series is a remake and it's Pokemon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. They are the remake of Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire from the Game Boy Advance. Pokemon Omega Ruby and Pokemon Alpha Sapphire are released on 2014 and as I said they are the remakes of the Game Boy Advance games Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire and also including features from Pokemon Emerald. The games are part of the 6th generation of the Pokemon video game series and were developed by Game Freak. These games were for the Nintendo 3DS and were announced in May 2014. The games were released in Japan, North America and Australia on 21st November 2014, exactly 12 years after the original release of Ruby and Sapphire, while the European release was the following week. Though Pokemon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire are remakes of the games from the 3rd generation, they retain the changes made in later generations, such as the split from the 4th generation and unlimited TM usage and triple battles from the 5th generation. They also retain most of the features of Pokemon X and Y, such as Mega Evolution. The games introduced new features including Primal Reversion for Groudon and Kyogre, as well as using Latios or Latias to fly around Hoenn. When flying around on Latios or Latias, players may encounter mirage spots. These spots feature Pokemon not otherwise available in Hoenn region, as well as numerous legendary from the previous generations. Pokemon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire sold a total of 14.46 million copies. Now we're heading to the 7th generation. These games started on the Nintendo 3DS and they headed over to the Nintendo Switch afterwards. The first games of the 7th generation were Pokemon Sun and Moon. Pokemon Sun and Moon were the 2016 role-playing games developed for the Nintendo 3DS. They are the first installments in the 7th generation of the Pokemon video game series, and they were first announced on February 2016, and then they were released worldwide on the 18th of November 2016. Pokemon Sun and Moon are a role-playing video game with adventure elements, and it's set in the fictional Aloha region, loosely based on Hawaii. Presented in a third-person overhead perspective, the player controls a young trainer who goes on a quest to catch and train creatures known as Pokemon and win battles against other trainers. By defeating opposing Pokemon in turn-based battles, the player's Pokemon gain experience, allowing them to level up and increase their battle statistics, learn new battle techniques, in some cases evolve into more powerful Pokemon. Players can capture wild Pokemon found during random encounters by weakening them in battle and catching them with Pokeballs, allowing them to be added to their parties. Players are also able to trade Pokemon with other human players using the Nintendo 3DS connectivity features. As with previous games in the series, certain Pokemon are only obtained either in Sun or in Pokemon Moon, while with players encouraged to trade with others in order to obtain all the Pokemon from both versions of the Pokemon games. The starters on Pokemon Sun and Moon are Rowlet, a grass and flying Pokemon, Litten, which is a fire Pokemon, and Poplio, which is a water Pokemon. There are many legendaries in Pokemon Sun and Moon, and two exclusive ones. I'm gonna start by showing you the legendaries that you can catch on both games. You could catch Zygarde, which was a dragon and ground Pokemon. Then we had Type Null, a normal Pokemon, Tapu Koko, an electric fairy Pokemon, Tapu Lele, a psychic fairy Pokemon, and Tapu Bulu, a grass fairy Pokemon. Tapu Fini was a water fairy Pokemon, and then we had Cosmog, a psychic type Pokemon, and Necrozma, also a psychic type Pokemon. The exclusive legendary Pokemon in Pokemon Moon was Lunala, which is a psychic ghost Pokemon, and the exclusive legendary in Pokemon Sun is Solgaleo, which is a psychic and steel Pokemon. The Pokemon Sun and Moon was taking place in Alola region, and there were 8 badges to be caught. Pokemon Sun and Moon sold a total of 16.27 million copies. Pokemon Ultra Moon and Ultra Sun were the next games in the series. Similar to previous games in this series, Pokemon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon are the role-playing video games with adventure elements. While set in an alternate version of the Alola region, the mechanics and graphics remain largely the same as Pokemon Sun and Moon, with the primary differences being in its modified storyline, now including the Ultra Recon Squad. The player character designs are also different, though they remain customizable with global missions, and we have players across the world which work together towards a collective goal, and also this makes a return as a feature on the game. There are many legendaries in this game. I'm not gonna mention all of them because, as I said, they are all the legendaries from the previous generations and from this generation as well. So you can go on and explore them by yourself. I've already mentioned them before in the previous games. so you can actually go on and see them by yourself. So Pokemon Ultra Moon and Ultra Sun sold a total of 9.04 million copies. The next set of games were the first Pokemon games on the Nintendo Switch, and they were Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Pokemon Let's Go Eevee. These games were a remake of Pokemon Yellow, but with many changes in the game mechanics. Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee were released worldwide for the Nintendo Switch on the 16th November 2018. The games are part of the 7th generation of the Pokemon video games and are the first main series installments to be released for the home game console. They feature connectivity with the mobile game Pokemon Go and support an optional controller, the Pokeball Plus. The story is more or less the same, and it has mostly the same Pokemon and locations in it. The main gameplay change is that you don't need to battle most Pokemon before attempting to capture them, but instead go straight to the capture screen. Only scripted encounters such as the sleeping Snorlax on the road or legendary Pokemon need to be battled before you can attempt to catch them. There are also a number of minor changes to the plot and world. The game doesn't force you to go through it in as much of a linear path as the original games did. Once you have completed the first 2 gyms, you can go and do the remainings in almost any order. There are no longer bicycles, and you can walk either direction on Cycling Road. The Safari Zone is gone, and it is replaced with a Go Park that you can use to transfer Pokemon from your Pokemon Go account. Many other little changes like that. You are forced to always keep your starter Pikachu or Eevee with you, although you don't actually have to have it on your combat team. It can't evolve, but it does get some ghostly overpowered moves that are unique to this game. The HM moves for travel are gone entirely. Instead, they are replaced with special techniques that your starter can use and which don't replace the normal combat moves. No more needing to keep a HM slave on your team. Also, any of your Pokemon can walk beside you in the overworld, and several of them can be actually ridden around. This replaces the bike as a form of faster walking and also is shown when you are using the special travel maneuvers. Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Pokemon Let's Go Eevee sold a total of 14.53 million copies. The next game on the list were the first set of proper Pokemon games on the Nintendo Switch, and they also marked the start of the 8th generation. The next games are Sword and Shield. Pokemon Sword and Shield are the first installment in the 8th generation of Pokemon video game series, and the second in the series following Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee, released on a home game console. Sword and Shield were released in the November 2019. The games received 2 downloadable content expansion packs through an expansion pass with the Isle of Armor released in June 2020 and the Crown Tundra released in October 2020. A physical bundle including both expansion packs with the base games were released in November 2020. The games introduced several new features to the series. These include co-op raid encounters, the Wild Area, and Dynamaxing and Gigantamaxing, both of which temporarily allow Pokemon to grow to a larger size. The Wild Area is a fully explorable open world area with free camera movement and dynamic weather, which has implications on which Pokemon species appear at a given time. Gigantamaxing is limited to select Pokemon and feature different forms from the Pokemon's normal appearance. A new mechanic called Pokejobs tasks the player's Pokemon with completing requests such as assisting in construction or cooking to gain experience or rare items. Pokemon gyms make a return after being absent in Sun and Moon and Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. As it's typical with the series, the 2 games have version-exclusive content such as certain Pokemon and the second time gym leaders. A new camp mode allows the player to interact and play with their Pokemon and cook different types of curry to provide them with bonuses. New customization options for the player character have been added, like outwear and other accessories. In most instances, the Pokemon box can now be accessed outside of the Pokemon centers. Like with Pokemon Sun and Moon, Pokemon previously introduced in older games such as Weezing gain regional Galarian forms with new typings, stats and appearances. Some Pokemon such as Linoone and Meowth even gain regional evolutions, a first in the series. Pokemon Sword and Shield starters are Grookey, which is a grass Pokemon, Scorbunny, a fire Pokemon, and Sobble, which is a water Pokemon. There are 3 total legendaries in Pokemon Sword and Shield, and one of them is exclusive to the game you will be playing. The legendaries are Type Null, which is a normal type Pokemon, and Eternatus, a poison dragon Pokemon. These are all the main game legendaries. The exclusive legendary for Pokemon Sword is Zacian, which is a fairy and steel Pokemon. The exclusive legendary Pokemon in Shield is Zamazenta, which is a fighting and steel Pokemon. After getting the updates and the expansion packs, you can catch basically all the legendaries from the previous generations. Pokemon Sword and Shield took place in the Galar region and there are 8 badges up for grabs. Pokemon Sword and Shield sold a total of 23.9 million copies. The next games in the list are a remake, Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Pokemon Shining Pearl, and they are the 2021 remake of the 2006 Pokemon Diamond and Pokemon Pearl. The games are part of the 8th generation of the Pokemon video game series for the Nintendo Switch. The games were released in 19th November 2021 and they were announced as part of the 25th anniversary event alongside Pokemon Legends Arceus. They are the first main Pokemon games not to be developed by Game Freak. Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl received mixed positive reviews, with praise given towards their gameplay and faithfulness to the original DS games. However, they have been criticized for their somewhat poor technical performance, along with their minimal inclusion of the content present in Pokemon Platinum. Their graphical style and uneven difficulty received a polarized response. Overall, the game's graphical style is different compared to Pokemon Sword and Shield. The camera returns to a mostly top-down viewing angle similar to the original Diamond and Pearl, while the player and NPCs appear with chibi proportions in the overworld but regular proportions in battle. The regular overworld uses random encounters only, while Pokemon hideaways in the Grand Underground use symbol encounters. Like in the originals, the games only include Pokemon from the first 4 generations, therefore the games include a total of 493 Pokemon. Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shiny Pearl sold a total of 14.65 million copies. The next game in the list is the last published Pokemon game of the main series. Pokemon Legends Arceus is a 2022 action role-playing game developed for the Nintendo Switch. It's part of the 8th generation of the Pokemon video game series and serves as a prequel to Pokemon Diamond and Pearl, the enhanced version Pokemon Platinum, and their remakes Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. The game was first announced as a part of the Pokemon 25th anniversary event in February 2021 and was released worldwide on 28th of January 2022. The game follows the protagonists sent back through time as they travel through the Hisui region based on the island of Hokkaido during early Japanese colonization, centered around exploration of the region's several open areas populated with Pokemon. The game's objective is to complete a roster of the region's Pokemon, known as the Pokédex. Pokemon Legends Arceus received generally favorable reviews and was a commercial success, having sold over 12 million copies. Pokemon Legends Arceus is an action role-playing game that preserves the core gameplay of past entries in the main line series. The player is able to roam freely across the game map, divided into 5 large areas or individual biomes. Each time the player enters such areas, they spawn in a camp and can fast travel to other camps in the same area. Outside of traversing the landscape on foot, the player can unlock rideable Pokemon which can travel faster, swim across bodies of water, climb cliffs or fly in each area. Pokemon wander the landscapes, being found in certain habitats, and will interact with both the player and their environments. Some will actively avoid the player, while others act aggressively, and some exhibit other specific behaviors. A number of alpha Pokemon, a larger, more powerful version of the Pokemon, can also be found in the areas. The multiple areas and the hub system instead of a fully open world gameplay resulted in reviewers comparing Legends Arceus with the Monster Hunter Rises. Reviewers also drew a comparison between Pokemon Legends Arceus and The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, noting apparent similarities in both gameplay and art style. Unlike the previous titles, the player character themselves can be attacked and harmed by wild Pokemon. If enough damage is taken, he or she will fall unconscious and reappear at the base camp. Players can capture wild Pokemon in the overworld without engaging in battle, though some must still be battled before being caught. Battles can be initiated by releasing captured Pokemon near a wild Pokemon. While the turn-based battle system of the prior titles are retained in the game, an additional feature is added which allows players to trade attack damage for more turns and vice versa. Outside standard battles, the game also introduces special boss battles where the player character has to dodge and attack powerful Pokemon. Regular turn-based battles being included during the fights as opportunities to stun the bosses. By battling, capturing or engaging with other interactions with Pokemon, players obtain progress in completing the Pokédex entries. Players can also take on and complete side quests given by NPCs in the game. In total, the game features 242 Pokemon on release, including 7 new species and 17 new interactions forms of existing Pokemon. At the start of the game, 3 starter Pokemon are available, and they are Rowlet, which is part of Sun and Moon, Cyndaquil from Gold and Silver, and Oshawott from Black and White. Pokemon Legends Arceus is the first mainline game to feature starter Pokemon from different regions together. While players could trade Pokemon online, Legends Arceus does not feature multiplayer battles, unlike previous installments in the series. There are many legendaries in this Pokemon game, and they are Arceus, which is a normal type Pokemon, Azef, which is a psychic Pokemon, Cresselia is a psychic Pokemon, Darkrai, which is a dark Pokemon, Dialga, a steel and dragon Pokemon, Enamorose, a fairy and flying Pokemon, Giratina, a ghost and dragon Pokemon, and Heatran, a fire and steel Pokemon. The game is set in a bygone era of the Sinnoh region's history, when it was known as the Hisui region, long before the events of Pokemon Diamond and Pearl and their remakes take place. Pokemon Legends Arceus sold a total of 12.64 million copies. The last games on this video are gonna be Pokemon Scarlet and Pokemon Violet. Pokemon Scarlet and Violet are the 2022 role-playing video games, and they are developed by Game Freak and published by Nintendo and the Pokemon Company for the Nintendo Switch only. They are the first installments in the 9th generation of the Pokemon games, and the first announcement was made on February 2022 and they were released on 18th of November 2022. Unlike the previous installments in the Pokemon franchise, Scarlet and Violet take place in an open world. Similar to Pokemon Legend Arceus, the game takes place in Paldea, which is based on the Iberian Peninsula. There are 3 separate player can take. Scarlet and Violet introduces 103 new Pokemon alongside 4 new regional forms, and the Terrestrial phenomenon, which allows the Pokemon to transform into an exclusive Terra type. The game also maintained features from previous modern Pokemon games, including areas and Pokemon appearing in the overworld. Scarlet and Violet received mixed reviews from the critics. The game were praised for their open-world formula and story, while their graphics and technical problems at launch received criticism. The game sold over 10 million copies in their first 3 days, making them the Nintendo's biggest launch of all time. Pokemon Scarlet and Violet starters are Sprigatito, which is a grass-type Pokemon, then we have Fuecoco, a fire Pokemon, and Quaxly, a water and flying Pokemon. The legendary Pokemon on these games are Koraidon, which is a Scarlet exclusive. It is a fighting and dragon Pokemon. Then we have Miraidon, which is the Violet exclusive legendary, and it is an electric and dragon Pokemon. Then we have Qianbao, which is a dark and ice Pokemon. Then we have Ting-Lu, a dark and ground Pokemon. After that we have Wuqin, a dark and grass Pokemon, and Chinyu, which is a dark and fire Pokemon. As I said earlier, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet sold a total of 10 million copies on the opening week. We don't have other numbers or updates from Nintendo, but there is a guarantee that that number has tripled in the last month. Hey guys, so thanks for watching this video, and if you did go until the end, I really appreciate it. Please leave me a like or a dislike so I can get better on making videos. Please subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and if you want me to make more videos in the future, I'm gonna be very grateful if you actually like and subscribe.